Just as important, if not more so, is the concept of a foreign key, because it is those keys that establish relationships between two tables and enforce our referential integrity rule. To state the definition verbatim from the slide, a foreign key is a column or combination of columns in which values must match those of an associated primary key in a related table. While this sentence is certainly a mouthful, it simply states that each value of customer ID in the order table must match one and only one value of customer ID in the customer table. Customer ID in the order table is a foreign key, establishing the relationship with the associated primary key, again customer ID, but this time in the customer table. Not only do the values have to match exactly, so do the data types. If you try to match long integer and integer in Microsoft Access, it will give you an error, although the values are matching just fine. Now switch to Notepad and open up the fourth script in the 02 Relate DM folder lecture subfolder called MySQL2 for create order table, and notice that it's called orders because the word order is reserved for sorting, and it'll not let you, MySQL won't let you create a table named order, so we had to add the S for plural with three ID tables, all of type integer, order ID, customer ID, employee ID, followed by the order date of date data type. You also notice the PK order primary key constraint designated order ID as a primary key, and then we're going to create the foreign key constraint as shown at the bottom of the current slide in red by typing constraint FK customer, capital F, capital K, capital C, foreign key, and in parentheses customer ID, and this is the customer ID in the order table, references customer table and customer ID in that table. Save all the changes and close the script, minimizing the Notepad++ and switch into Toad. Open the same script in Toad. Okay, and after reviewing it for accuracy, run to execute the script, and if you don't get any errors, you will have a newly created empty orders table with the order ID as the primary key, which is also shown here, as well as under constraints tab a foreign key FK customer referencing customer ID of the customer table. We'll close both of these windows and switch to Access. In Access, tables are typically created from scratch in a table design rather than running it from the script like we did with the customer table in a previous video. So we'll create an orders table directly in the table design by typing order ID number field of long integer type, customer ID also number field, also long integer type, and finally the employee ID number field of long integer type, ending with order date of a date type, date time type, and let's say short date format. Okay, we'll designate order ID as the primary key. All right, and then save the design of the table with name orders with the reasons we just outlined. So now we have all 5 tables from customer to product, and we'll close the design of the orders table and go under database tool relationships to observe that order detail, employee, and product are already there, and the customer and orders, which we just added recently, are not. We're going to use the show table to add the customer and add the orders table, extend the customer to see the whole list of fields, and then we're going to create the foreign key constraint we did explicitly through code for MySQL by dragging the primary key customer ID in the customer table onto what's going to soon to become a foreign key with the same name in the orders table, enforcing the referential integrity, which is sort of of great importance to us, and then clicking on the create button to establish this relationship. Now the customer ID is a foreign key in orders table, referencing the customer ID in the customer table. Again, the names of these two fields do not necessarily have to match, although matching them is a good programming practice. We'll create the other two foreign key constraints by connecting the orders table and order detail table on order ID. Okay, one in orders, one in order detail table, and then finally connecting the employee table with the orders table using employee ID in both. Then we'll save the changes in the relationship design and close that window, and then we'll minimize access. And at this point we will return to the presentation and briefly talk about one more type of foreign key that's sort of a little bit special. It's called a self-referencing relationship and self-referencing sort of foreign key, which is a relationship in which a foreign key refers to the same table, and that's why it's called self-referencing relationship. It's less frequent but important nevertheless. So here the foreign key is another column in the same table that meets the definition from the previous slide. So the supervisor column in the employee table is one such example. Most of the sporting goods employees are sales clerks, but few are supervisors. Each of the sales clerks then has a supervisor ID as an additional attribute defining his or her supervisor. Who supervises the supervisors, you might ask? This is a good example where, in absence of a higher up manager, the supervisor column for supervisors is actually null. In other words, there is no supervisor, which could be avoided using some kind of a generic number like 99, but null is really more appropriate in this example. It simply states that the supervisor does not have one him or herself. So the absence of value is completely justifiable. So what we're going to do for the end of this video, we're going to try to add the PK employee primary key for the employee ID column, and then the self-referencing foreign key for the supervisor. All right, by switching back to, let's switch back to Notepad, open up the fifth of the script, which is the create employee table script, and then scroll down to the bottom and add the two constraints, one for the primary, one for the foreign key, following the bottom of the slide in red. So constraint PK employee, okay, as primary key on employee ID, comma, another constraint, okay, constraint FK supervisor, foreign key on the supervisor column. That's the supervisor column right here in the employee table, and this is the self-reference references, okay, the same employee table, and then employee ID as the primary key, which is the one right here at the top. Okay, we're going to save all the changes. Close the script, and then open it in Toad. Now, I had some trouble running this script on the occasion. Specifically, the trouble arose on the foreign key supervisor, and in some other instances it ran just fine. So not being sure what is really the case, I'm going to sort of review it and make sure everything is apparently okay, and then click the execute button, and it did indeed create the employee table right here with the employee ID as a primary key. But when we right click on it and choose to view details, you'll see that that is the indeed employee ID, and then we'll see on the constraints that foreign key on the supervisor column, self-referencing the employee ID as the primary key. Okay, we're going to close these windows. I'm going to switch back to the presentation, and this is a good place to stop.